At Christmas, when I came back from work, my wife branded me a liar in front of our family and friends. They made me wear a sign that said, "Family disgrace," and asked me to eat with the kids. I didn't cry. I took action. 2 days later, my phone was blowing up with their hysterical calls. You know what they say about Christmas miracles? Yeah, well, they're about as real as my wife's claim that she forgot to buy me a present again this year. Let me paint you a picture of my Christmas Eve, and trust me, it's not the kind that ends up on a Hallmark card unless Hallmark suddenly decides to branch out into psychological horror. So there I was, dragging my sorry butt through the front door after pulling a double shift at the warehouse because apparently, even Santa's elves get overtime pay, but not this guy. My back was screaming louder than a Karen at Target. My feet felt like I'd been tap dancing on broken glass for 12 hours straight, and all I wanted was to collapse into my recliner with a beer and pretend that eggnog could cure the existential dread of another year gone by. But no, the universe had other plans. Because as soon as I stepped into what should have been my sanctuary, my safe haven, my castle where I'm supposedly the king, I walked straight into what can only be described as a holiday ambush that would make the Boston Tea Party look like a friendly neighborhood potluck. Picture this. The living room is packed tighter than a subway car during rush hour with Clara's entire extended family tree. And I'm talking the whole damn forest here. Uncle Frank with his beer gut that could serve as a flotation device. Aunt Becca with her fake laugh that sounds like a hyena having an asthma attack. The cousins who think TikTok dances count as legitimate conversation. And Grandma perched in her chair like some kind of holiday judge ready to sentence me to death by embarrassment. The smell of Clara's famous pot roast was wafting through the air, mixed with that particular scent of family dysfunction that no Yankee Candle has managed to capture yet, though I'm sure they're working on it. Everyone's chattering away, glasses clinking, kids running around like they've been mainlining pure sugar since dawn, and for about 2 seconds, I thought maybe, just maybe, this Christmas Eve might actually resemble something normal. That's when Clara, my beloved wife of 15 years, the mother of my children, the woman who promised to love, honor, and cherish me through sickness and health, decided to drop the atomic bomb of holiday humiliation right in the middle of our living room. She stands up, and I swear the whole room goes quiet like she's about to deliver the Gettysburg Address or announce that she's pregnant with triplets. But instead, this woman, the same woman who can't remember where she put her car keys 5 minutes after using them, pulls out a piece of cardboard that she's apparently been crafting like some demented Pinterest project. And written across this sign in big, bold, Christmas red letters that probably cost more than my lunch budget for the week are the words "Family Disgrace." Now, I don't know what you were expecting from this story, but I can tell you right now that family disgrace isn't exactly the Christmas greeting I was hoping to receive after busting my ass all day to keep the lights on in this house. But Clara, she's got that smirk on her face, the same one she gets when she finds a good deal at Target or when she catches me trying to sneak an extra cookie from the jar, and she looks me dead in the eye and says, "Surprise, honey, we got you something special this year." And before I can even process what's happening, before my brain can catch up to the absolute insanity unfolding in front of me, she's hanging this sign around my neck like I'm some kind of holiday scarecrow, and the entire room erupts into laughter. Not polite, awkward laughter, mind you, but full-blown, knee-slapping, tears streaming down their faces laughter like I just delivered the punchline to the greatest joke in human history. Uncle Frank is practically wheezing, slapping his thigh like he's at a comedy club instead of my living room. Becca's got her phone out, and I can see her already composing the Facebook post that's going to make me the laughingstock of the entire neighborhood. The kids are clapping and cheering like they're watching a circus act, and honestly, at this point, I'm starting to feel like the main attraction at the world's most dysfunctional Christmas pageant. But wait, it gets better. Because Clara, riding high on her wave of holiday cruelty, points across the room to the kids' table. You know, the little plastic table with the wobbly leg that we usually reserve for anyone under the age of 10, and announces to the entire assembled family circus, "That's where you belong tonight, disgrace." And you know what the worst part is? Everyone just goes with it. Nobody questions it. Nobody raises an eyebrow. Nobody says, "Hey, maybe this is a little harsh for Christmas Eve." Nope, they all just nod along like Clara just announced the weather forecast. And suddenly I'm being escorted to sit at a table that's roughly knee-high, surrounded by my own kids and their various cousins who are all looking at me like I'm the entertainment for the evening. So there I am, a grown man with a mortgage and back pain, and the kind of existential crisis that only comes from realizing your life has somehow turned into a bad sitcom. Sitting at the kids' table wearing a paper crown from a Christmas cracker that someone had the audacity to put on my head, and a cardboard sign that basically announces to the world that I'm the family failure. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom on Christmas Eve while your entire extended family treats you like their personal comedy relief. It gives you a lot of time to think. And as I sat there, cutting up chicken nuggets for 7-year-old Liam and listening to the adults at the grown-up table yucking it up at my expense, something started brewing in the back of my mind that was definitely not Christmas spirit. You see, Santa's got a list, and he checks it twice to find out who's naughty or nice. But what they don't tell you in those Christmas songs is that sometimes the guy getting treated like garbage also keeps lists. And as I sat there in my paper crown, wearing my badge of shame, I started mentally checking off names and thinking about just how naughty everyone in that room had been to the guy who's been keeping their lives afloat all year long. Oh yeah, Christmas morning was going to be very interesting indeed. You know those moments when you think your day can't possibly get any worse, and then life looks at you and says, "Hold my beer." Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because if Chapter 1 was the appetizer of humiliation, dinner was about to be a 5-course feast of family dysfunction, served with a side of public embarrassment that would make a reality TV show producer weep tears of joy. So there I am, still sporting my family disgrace sign like some kind of twisted Christmas ornament, when Clara announces that dinner is ready. Now, normally, this would be the part where everyone shuffles into the dining room, fights over who gets the good chairs, and pretends to enjoy small talk, while secretly judging each other's life choices. But this year was special, because apparently Clara had decided that my punishment wasn't nearly complete yet. The dining room table looked like something straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting, if Norman Rockwell had been into psychological warfare and seasonal sadism. There's the good china that only comes out twice a year, the fancy cloth napkins that cost more than my lunch for a week, candles flickering like they're setting the mood for my public execution, and enough food to feed a small army of ungrateful relatives who apparently think I'm their personal entertainment system. Everyone starts filing in, claiming their spots at the adult table like they're staking out territory in some kind of holiday land grab. Uncle Frank plops down in his usual spot, the chair groaning under the weight of his beer gut and his inflated sense of self-importance. Aunt Becca takes her place next to him, already pulling out her phone to document what I'm sure she thinks will be the highlight of her social media feed for the next month. Grandma settles into her chair with the kind of authority that only comes from surviving 8 decades and developing the ability to cut you down with a single disapproving look. And then there's me, still relegated to the kids' table like I'm some kind of overgrown toddler who can't be trusted with the grown-up silverware. The plastic table that wobbles every time someone breathes on it, surrounded by actual children who are at least honest about their immaturity, unlike the so-called adults who are about to spend the next hour roasting me like I'm the main course. Clara brings out the food, and I have to admit, the woman can cook. The pot roast looks perfect, the mashed potatoes are fluffy enough to use as pillows, and the green bean casserole is actually edible, which is more than I can say for most of her relatives. But as she's serving everyone at the big kid table, making sure they all get the good cuts of meat and the perfect portions, she plops down a paper plate in front of me with what can only be described as the leftovers of the leftovers. I'm talking about the end piece of the roast that's more well done than a hockey puck, mashed potatoes that look like they've been sitting under a heat lamp since the Clinton administration, and green beans that have achieved that special shade of olive drab that only comes from being overcooked into submission. But hey, at least the kids are getting chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, so I guess I know where I rank in the family food chain. That's when Uncle Frank, bless his alcohol-pickled heart, decides to kick off what I can only assume he thinks is going to be the comedy event of the century. He raises his glass of wine, the good stuff that I probably paid for, by the way, and announces to the entire table, "Hey, disgrace, pass the potatoes." And just like that, the floodgates of family cruelty burst wide open like a dam made of passive-aggressive holiday cheer and years of pent-up resentment. Because apparently, once you've been designated as the family punching bag, Everyone suddenly develops a case of temporary amnesia about basic human decency and decides that Christmas dinner is the perfect time to practice their stand-up routine. Becca, not to be outdone by her husband's comedic genius, chimes in with her own contribution to the evening's entertainment. "Don't give him too much," she says, gesturing at me like I'm some kind of zoo animal on display. "He's already a disgrace to the diet world, too." And she delivers this line with the kind of timing that suggests she's been rehearsing it in the mirror all day, probably while applying her third layer of mascara and convincing herself that she's the clever one in the family. The whole table erupts into laughter again, because apparently, my weight is now fair game for public commentary along with everything else about my existence. Never mind that I've been working double shifts to keep everyone's lights on, or that I haven't had time to hit the gym because I've been too busy playing ATM for half the people at this table. Nope. Let's all have a good laugh about how the guy who's been busting his ass to support everyone else might have put on a few pounds from stress eating and surviving on vending machine dinners. But wait, there's more. Because Cousin Jerry, who's about as sharp as a bowling ball and twice as useful, decides he wants in on the action too. "At least now we know where to seat him next year," he says, slapping the table like he just delivered the punchline that's going to get him discovered by a talent scout. The reject table. And everyone laughs again, because apparently, my family has the collective sense of humor of a middle school cafeteria and the emotional maturity to match. Even Grandma, sweet old Grandma who usually only speaks up to ask someone to pass the salt or to complain about how loud the TV is, decides this is her moment to shine. She looks at me with those watery blue eyes that have seen everything from the Great Depression to the invention of the internet, and she chuckles. Actually chuckles, like she's watching her favorite episode of Wheel of Fortune where someone just solved the puzzle with one letter showing. Meanwhile, I'm sitting at this plastic table that was probably manufactured when dinosaurs roamed the earth, cutting up chicken nuggets for 7-year-old Liam, who keeps asking me why the grown-ups are being mean to me. And you know what I tell him? I tell him that sometimes adults forget how to use their inside voices and their inside manners, which is apparently the most diplomatic way I can explain to a child that his extended family has turned into a pack of holiday hyenas. But here's where it gets really rich, and by rich I mean so ironic it could probably solve the national debt. As I'm sitting there, being treated like the family's personal comedy relief, cutting up nuggets and wiping juice box spills, I start doing some mental math. You know, the kind of math that happens when you're being publicly humiliated and your brain starts cataloging exactly how much money you've spent keeping these people's lives running smoothly. Uncle Frank, the same guy who just called me a disgrace while asking me to pass the potatoes? Yeah, he's been living in the apartment above my garage for the past 6 months, rent-free, because he got laid off from his job and couldn't make ends meet. The same Aunt Becca who's making cracks about my weight. She's driving a car that I co-signed for because her credit score is lower than my opinion of her right now. And don't even get me started on Cousin Jerry, who borrowed $500 from me last month for what he called an emergency, but what I'm pretty sure was actually his contribution to the local casino's Christmas bonus fund. The more I think about it, the more I realize that I'm basically sitting at the kids' table being roasted by a bunch of people who couldn't survive financially without me playing Santa Claus all year long. I'm the guy who picks up the tab when everyone goes out to dinner because I'm the one with the steady job. I'm the one who gets the panicked phone calls at 2 in the morning because someone's car broke down and they need a ride or a loan or both. I'm the family bank, the emergency contact, the guy everyone calls when their life falls apart and they need someone to pick up the pieces. But tonight I'm the family disgrace who doesn't deserve a seat at the adult table. As the dinner progresses and the jokes keep coming, each one more creative than the last in terms of how they can make me the punchline of their evening's entertainment, I find myself thinking about something my old boss used to say. He was this crusty old guy who'd been running the warehouse since before I was born, and he had this philosophy about timing. Humor is about timing. He used to tell me whenever someone in the crew would try to be funny and fall flat on their face. You got to know when to deliver the punchline, or it just comes off as mean. Well, their timing tonight was absolutely perfect. Perfect for giving me all the motivation I needed to start planning something that would make their little Christmas dinner roast look like a church picnic. Because while they're all having their laughs at my expense, sitting around my dining room table, eating food bought with my money, in a house that I pay the mortgage on, They're also unknowingly providing me with a comprehensive list of every way they've taken advantage of my generosity over the years. And you know what they say about revenge? It's a dish best served cold, and lucky for me, it was about to be winter for a very long time in this family. The funniest part? They had no idea that the real punchline was still coming, and when it hit, nobody was going to be laughing except me. You know what's funny about the phrase Silent Night? It's supposed to evoke images of peace, tranquility, maybe some snow gently falling outside while families gather in warm, loving embraces around twinkling Christmas trees. Well, let me tell you about my silent night, and spoiler alert, the only thing peaceful about it was the fact that I managed not to commit a felony before sunrise. After what can only be described as the dinner from hell finally wrapped up, and the last of Clara's delightful relatives had stumbled out the door with their bellies full of my food and their hearts full of satisfaction from spending 2 hours using me as target practice for their pathetic attempts at humor, I found myself standing in my own kitchen, staring at a sink full of dishes that somehow had become my responsibility to clean. Because apparently, when you're the family disgrace, you also automatically become the family dishwasher. Clara, bless her vindictive little heart, had disappeared upstairs with the kids to get them ready for bed, leaving me alone with the aftermath of what could only be described as a holiday massacre of my dignity. The dining room looked like a tornado had blown through it. There were wine stains on my tablecloth that would probably require a hazmat team to remove, and somewhere in the chaos, I'd lost what remained of my will to pretend that this marriage was anything more than an elaborate financial arrangement with shared custody. I started loading the dishwasher. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like scraping leftover pot roast off your good china while wearing a family disgrace sign to really put your life into perspective. Each plate I rinsed was like a small meditation on how spectacularly my Christmas Eve had gone off the rails, and each piece of silverware was a gentle reminder that I'd somehow become the entertainment committee for a group of people who wouldn't piss on me if I was on fire, unless they thought it might be funny to film it for their social media accounts. But here's the thing about doing dishes after you've been publicly humiliated by your own family. It gives you a lot of time to think. And think I did. Oh boy, did I think. While I'm scrubbing gravy stains and trying to figure out how Uncle Frank managed to get mashed potatoes on the ceiling, my brain is running through a highlight reel of every single moment from the evening, cataloging each insult, each laugh at my expense, each moment when someone I'm supposed to love and who's supposed to love me back decided that treating me like garbage was the height of holiday entertainment. By the time I finished cleaning up the disaster zone that used to be my dining room, it was close to midnight, and the house had finally settled into that quiet that only comes after a full day of chaos and dysfunction. Clara had gotten the kids to bed, probably after spending an hour explaining to them why Daddy was sitting at the little table and wearing a sign like some kind of holiday scarecrow. And now it was just me, my thoughts, and the lingering smell of pot roast and betrayal. I made my way upstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last, like I was walking to my own execution instead of just going to bed in my own house. The family disgrace sign was still hanging around my neck, because honestly, at this point it felt less like a punishment and more like a truth in advertising label. I was a disgrace, wasn't I? A disgrace for working double shifts to keep everyone comfortable. A disgrace for paying everyone's bills without complaint. A disgrace for putting up with years of this kind of treatment without ever standing up for myself. I walked into our bedroom, and there was Clara, already tucked into bed like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just orchestrated the most elaborate public humiliation of my adult life. She was lying there in her Christmas pajamas, the ones I bought her last year because she mentioned liking them when we saw them at Target, scrolling through her phone with that satisfied little smile that she gets when she thinks she's been particularly clever. I started getting ready for bed, moving through my routine like a zombie, brushing my teeth while staring at myself in the bathroom mirror and wondering when exactly I'd become this pathetic shell of a human being who lets his own wife treat him like a reject from a bad sitcom. The guy looking back at me from the mirror wasn't the man I used to be, the guy who had dreams and ambitions and enough self-respect to walk away from people who treated him like dirt. When I finally climbed into bed, carefully folding the family disgrace sign and placing it on the nightstand like it was some kind of twisted memento from the worst Christmas Eve in recorded history, Clara finally decided to acknowledge my presence. She rolled over, her voice carrying that tone of casual dismissiveness that had become her trademark over the years, and said, "You're too sensitive. Learn to take a joke." And there it was. The same line she always used, the same dismissive little phrase that was supposed to magically make everything okay. Like I was some kind of overgrown child who couldn't understand that being treated like garbage was actually a sign of affection. Learn to take a joke. As if spending an entire evening being humiliated in front of my own children was the same as someone making a crack about my hairline or my choice in sports teams. But this time, something was different. This time, instead of just swallowing my anger and rolling over like I always did, instead of convincing myself that maybe she was right and I was being too sensitive, something inside me clicked. Not snapped, not broke, but clicked, like a lock finally finding the right key or a puzzle piece falling into place. I lay there in the dark, listening to Clara's breathing as she settled back into her satisfied sleep, and for the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt something that wasn't resignation or defeat, or that bone-deep tiredness that comes from constantly trying to please people who can't be pleased. I felt clarity, crystal clear, ice-cold clarity about exactly what my life had become and exactly what I was going to do about it. You see, Clara was wrong about me being too sensitive. I wasn't too sensitive. I was too generous. I wasn't too emotional. I was too giving. I wasn't too weak. I was too accommodating. And while she was lying there, probably already planning tomorrow's entertainment at my expense, I was lying there making plans of my own. I started thinking about the kids' table, about how perfectly it represented my place in this family. I wasn't just relegated to the children's seating because of some cruel joke. I was there because that's exactly how everyone saw me. The child. The one who needed to be managed and controlled and kept away from the important conversations. The one who could be counted on to pay for everything but couldn't be trusted with a voice in any decisions. But children, real children, eventually grow up. They eventually learn to stand up for themselves. They eventually learn that being treated badly isn't something you have to accept just because the people doing it claim to love you. As I lay there in the dark, I started imagining their faces when the tables turned. Literally, the tables. I started thinking about what it would feel like to watch Uncle Frank's smug expression disappear when he realized that his free ride was over. I started picturing Becca's reaction when she figured out that her financial safety net had been cut. I started visualizing Grandma's confusion when the gravy train finally pulled out of the station for good. And Clara? Sweet, vindictive Clara, who thought she was so clever with her cardboard signs and her kids' table punishment. I started thinking about what it would be like to watch her scramble when she realized that the family disgrace she'd been mocking was actually the family foundation, and that foundation was about to shift in ways she couldn't even imagine. The more I thought about it, the more the plan started forming in my head, piece by piece, like a jigsaw puzzle of justice that was finally coming together after years of scattered pieces lying around and used. I wasn't going to yell or scream or throw a tantrum like the overgrown child they apparently thought I was. I was going to do something much worse than that. I was going to be smart about it. You see, the thing about being the family bank, the guy everyone comes to when they need money or help or someone to bail them out of their latest crisis, is that you develop a pretty comprehensive understanding of everyone's financial situation. You know who owes what to whom, who's living beyond their means, who's one missed payment away from disaster. You know where all the bodies are buried, financially speaking. And when you're lying in bed at midnight on Christmas Eve, wearing the metaphorical scars of an evening spent being treated like garbage by people who depend on your generosity to survive, that knowledge becomes incredibly valuable. I wasn't going to get mad. I was going to get even. And the beautiful thing about revenge, when you hold all the financial cards, it's not just sweet, it's also completely legal. Silent night? Oh, it was about to get a whole lot more silent around here. Because tomorrow, Santa was going to start checking his list, and a whole lot of people were about to find out what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. The only sound in the room was Clara's contented breathing and my own heart beating with something that felt suspiciously like anticipation. Christmas morning was going to be very, very interesting indeed. You know what's beautiful about Boxing Day? It's the day after Christmas when everyone's too bloated and hungover to function properly, sprawled around in their new pajamas like a bunch of satisfied walruses, completely oblivious to the fact that their world is about to get rearranged faster than Black Friday merchandise. While Clara's extended family of financial parasites was lounging around my living room, bragging about their gifts and planning their post-holiday shopping sprees with money they didn't have, I was in my home office drafting what I like to call Operation Reality Check. The morning started innocently enough. I woke up before everyone else, which isn't exactly breaking news since I've been the early bird in this house for about as long as I can remember. The family disgrace sign was still sitting on my nightstand like some kind of twisted Christmas ornament, and for a hot second, I considered throwing it away. But then I thought better of it. No, that little piece of cardboard was going to serve as my motivation, my daily reminder of exactly why what I was about to do was not only justified, but absolutely necessary. Clara was still dead to the world, probably dreaming about her next opportunity to publicly humiliate me. While downstairs I could hear the familiar sounds of her relatives making themselves at home in my house. Uncle Frank was already up, judging by the sound of my refrigerator opening and closing approximately every 30 seconds. Becca was on the phone with someone, her voice carrying that particular tone of superiority that she uses when she's gossiping about people who she thinks are beneath her, which is pretty much everyone except Martha Stewart and whoever's currently dating Brad Pitt. I grabbed my laptop and headed to the kitchen to make some coffee, because let's face it, you can't orchestrate the downfall of ungrateful relatives without proper caffeine levels. As I'm waiting for the coffee to brew, Uncle Frank shuffles in wearing a bathrobe that's seen better decades and a pair of slippers that I'm pretty sure he borrowed from my closet at some point. "Morning, disgrace," he says with a chuckle, like he's the first person in history to ever think of morning comedy. "Got any of that fancy coffee creamer? The good stuff, not that generic garbage." And there it is, right there, the perfect example of the problem I'm about to solve. Here's a guy who's been living rent-free in my garage apartment for 6 months, eating my food, using my electricity, basically treating my generosity like his personal welfare system. And he has the audacity to not only call me names, but also be picky about my coffee creamer. The same coffee creamer that I buy with the money I make working overtime while he sits around all day watching Judge Judy and collecting unemployment benefits. "Sure thing, Frank," I tell him, pouring myself a cup of coffee and adding a generous splash of the good creamer, the expensive stuff that costs more per ounce than some people make in an hour. "Help yourself to whatever you want. It's not like I'm paying for it or anything." He completely misses the sarcasm, of course, because Frank's irony detector has been broken since approximately the Carter administration. He just grins and starts doctoring up his coffee like he's some kind of barista instead of a middle-aged mooch who can't figure out how to support himself. I take my coffee and my laptop and head to my home office, which is really just a converted bedroom that I use to pay all the bills that keep this circus running. As I'm settling in at my desk, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and files that represent the financial life support system for half the people currently eating my food and breathing my air, I start pulling up bank statements, loan documents, and credit card accounts. Now, let me paint you a picture of exactly what I discovered during my little archaeological dig through the family finances. It was like uncovering the lost city of Atlantis, except instead of ancient treasures, I found a comprehensive map of just how deep everyone's hands were in my pockets. Uncle Frank, the same guy who just insulted me while requesting premium coffee creamer, wasn't just living rent-free in my garage apartment. Oh no, that would be too simple. Turns out I'd also been paying his car insurance for the past 8 months because he claimed he was temporarily between insurance policies. His cell phone was on my family plan because he needed to save money until he got back on his feet. Even his Netflix subscription was linked to my credit card because, and I quote from the text message he sent me last spring, "It's just $10, bro, and I'll pay you back when my unemployment check comes in." But wait, there's more. Becca, the same woman who thought my weight was fair game for public commentary, had somehow managed to convince me to co-sign for her car loan 2 years ago when her credit score was apparently lower than the temperature in Antarctica. Not only was I on the hook for that monthly payment if she defaulted, but I'd also been the one covering her car insurance for the past 6 months because she claimed her premium had gone up and she was having a tough time making ends meet. And then there's Grandma. Sweet old Grandma who chuckled along with everyone else while they treated me like a holiday piñata. Turns out Grandma's emergency credit card that I'd given her 3 years ago for genuine emergencies had been getting quite the workout. emergency mani pedis, emergency shopping sprees at Target, emergency dinners at restaurants that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. The woman had been using my credit card like it was her personal shopping allowance, and I'd been too stupid or too generous to put a stop to it. But the real kicker, the cherry on top of this Sunday of financial abuse, was discovering just how deep Clara's own family had been dipping into the well. Her brother Jared, the guy who barely acknowledged my existence unless he needed something, was driving a car that I'd made the down payment for. Clara's mom had been using one of my credit cards for her emergencies, which apparently included regular visits to her plastic surgeon because heaven forbid a 70-year-old woman should look her age. Even Clara's sister Margaret, who couldn't be bothered to show up for Christmas dinner but somehow managed to send a passive-aggressive card about how some people don't appreciate family, had borrowed $1,500 from me last summer for what she claimed were unexpected medical expenses, but what I strongly suspected were actually vacation expenses, based on the Instagram photos of her trip to Cancun that appeared mysteriously around the same time. As I'm scrolling through months of bank statements and credit card bills, adding up the numbers, and creating what can only be described as a comprehensive catalog of financial exploitation, I start to feel something that I haven't felt in years: power. Not the kind of power that comes from yelling or making threats, but the quiet, dangerous kind of power that comes from having information and knowing exactly how to use it. You see, the beautiful thing about being everyone's personal ATM is that you develop a very clear understanding of just how dependent they all are on your continued generosity. Remove that generosity, and suddenly everyone's comfortable little world starts to crumble faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. I started making phone calls. First, I called the credit card companies. "Hi, I'd like to remove some authorized users from my account," I said in my most polite, customer service-friendly voice. "Yes, I understand there might be cards in their possession. Yes, I'd like those canceled immediately." Next, I called the car insurance company. "I'd like to remove some vehicles from my policy," I explained to the very helpful representative who probably deals with situations like this more often than you'd think. "No, I don't need to notify the other parties. These are voluntary removals." Then came the really fun part, calling the bank to modify automatic payments and standing authorizations. "I need to stop some recurring transfers," I told them, reading off account numbers and routing numbers that I knew by heart because I'd been the one setting them up in the first place. Yes, effective immediately. With each phone call, each canceled authorization, each removed name from each account, I felt a little bit more like myself again. Not the beaten down, taken for granted guy who'd been sitting at the kids' table wearing a family disgrace sign, but the guy who'd been working his ass off to support a bunch of people who apparently saw him as nothing more than a walking wallet with no feelings and unlimited funds. The really beautiful part about my plan was how completely legal it all was. I wasn't stealing anything, wasn't breaking any laws, wasn't even being vindictive in any way that could get me in trouble. I was simply exercising my right to control my own finances, to decide where my money went and who had access to it. If that happened to inconvenience some people who'd been taking advantage of my generosity for years, well, that was just an unfortunate side effect of me finally growing a backbone. As I finished up my calls and started organizing all the paperwork that would document my newly streamlined financial situation, I could hear stirring from upstairs. Clara was finally waking up, probably getting ready to come down and start her day by finding new ways to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. But here's the thing about hierarchies. They only work when everyone agrees to their position on the ladder. And I was about to demonstrate to my dear wife and her lovely family that the guy they'd all been treating like the bottom rung was actually the foundation holding the whole damn thing up. I poured myself another cup of coffee, leaned back in my chair, and smiled for the first time in what felt like months. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. You know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men? Well, let me tell you, when you're dealing with a family that has the collective intelligence of a box of rocks and the financial awareness of toddlers at a candy store, your plans tend to work out even better than you imagined. And boy, did my plans work out beautifully. It was 2 days after Boxing Day, and I was sitting in my office at the warehouse, enjoying what had become my new favorite activity. Watching my phone buzz with increasingly panicked messages from people who were just beginning to realize that their gravy train had not only left the station, but had been completely derailed, and was currently on fire in a ditch somewhere outside of reality. The morning had started like any other Wednesday. I'd gotten up, made my coffee in blissful silence because Clara was still giving me the cold shoulder treatment that she thought was punishment, but was actually the best gift she could have given me, and headed to work where I could enjoy the simple pleasure of being around people who actually appreciated my contributions instead of treating me like their personal ATM and comedy relief rolled into one pathetic package. I was about halfway through my first cup of coffee when my phone started vibrating like it was having some kind of electronic seizure. At first, I figured it was probably just spam calls or maybe one of those political text messages that somehow keep finding their way to my phone despite the fact that I've never given my number to any political organization and wouldn't trust most politicians to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a country. But when I picked up my phone and saw that little notification bubble showing 17 unread messages in the family group chat, I knew that the fireworks had officially begun. And let me tell you, they were more spectacular than anything Disney could have produced for their 4th of July celebration. The family group chat, for those lucky enough to never have experienced this particular form of digital torture, is one of those things that starts out with good intentions. You know, sharing family photos, coordinating holiday plans, maybe sending the occasional funny meme, and somehow evolves into a 24/7 stream of complaints, drama, and requests for money that would make a Nigerian prince scammer blush with embarrassment. Usually, my contribution to this chat consists of the occasional sure or sounds good when someone's making plans that I'll inevitably end up paying for, and the very rare emoji response when someone shares a photo that doesn't actively annoy me. But today was different. Today I was about to become the star of the show in ways that nobody saw coming. I opened the chat, and the first message hit me like a beautiful symphony of panic and confusion. It was from Clara's mother, Patricia, and it was time-stamped at 6:47 a.m., which told me that she'd been up early trying to figure out what had gone wrong with her little financial ecosystem. "Why did my card decline?" she'd written, followed by 3 question marks, because apparently one wasn't sufficient to express her confusion at the concept that credit cards require actual money behind them to function properly. The next message was from my dear brother-in-law Jared, sent just 12 minutes later, and his panic was already escalating to levels that would have been comedy gold if I hadn't been the one orchestrating the whole beautiful disaster. "Where's my car payment?" he'd typed, and I could practically hear the confusion and terror in his voice through the screen. Followed immediately by, "The bank called me this morning asking about my loan status." But the real crown jewel, the message that made me smile so wide I probably looked like the Cheshire Cat's psychotic older brother, came from Uncle Frank at 7:23 a.m. Now, Frank isn't usually up before noon unless there's a football game on or someone's offering free food. So the fact that he was awake and messaging at this ungodly hour told me that something had seriously disrupted his usual routine of sleeping until the crack of noon, and then spending the rest of the day making other people's lives his personal entertainment. "Bro, why did the power company say you removed autopay?" he'd written, and I could just picture him standing in his apartment, my apartment, staring at a disconnect notice and trying to figure out how the magical bill-paying fairy had suddenly stopped visiting his little corner of freeloading paradise. The messages kept coming throughout the morning, each one more frantic than the last, as the various members of my extended family started to realize that the financial safety net they'd been bouncing around on for years had suddenly developed some very large, very inconvenient holes. There was Clara's sister Becca, wondering why her auto insurance payment had bounced and why she'd received a notice about policy cancellation. There was cousin Jerry, confused about why his gym membership had been canceled when he was sure someone else was supposed to be paying for it. Even Grandma had somehow gotten involved, asking if anyone knew why her cable had been shut off and whether it was related to that internet thing that she'd never quite figured out how to use properly. I sat there reading through this beautiful tapestry of confusion and growing panic, sipping my coffee and feeling something that I hadn't experienced in years, the pure, unadulterated satisfaction of watching a plan come together exactly as intended. It was better than Christmas morning, better than getting a raise, better than finding $20 in an old pair of pants. This was justice served with a side of poetic irony and a generous helping of long overdue consequences. But the best part, the absolute cherry on top of this sundae of schadenfreude, was that none of them had figured out yet that this wasn't some cosmic coincidence or series of unfortunate events. They were all still operating under the assumption that these were just random problems that would somehow resolve themselves, like they always had before when I quietly fixed everything behind the scenes without anyone even noticing. I decided it was time to make my grand entrance into the conversation. After all, what's the point of orchestrating a masterpiece if you don't get to take a bow when the curtain falls? I typed out my response carefully, making sure to strike just the right tone of innocent confusion mixed with subtle sarcasm. Disgrace can't be trusted, remember? Then, because I'm nothing if not thorough, I added a Santa emoji. You know, just to really drive the point home about the season of giving, and how sometimes the best gift you can give someone is a reality check delivered with surgical precision. The silence that followed was so profound I could practically hear it through the phone. It was the kind of silence that falls over a room when someone drops a bombshell that completely reframes everything everyone thought they understood about their situation. The kind of silence that happens when people suddenly realize that the ground they've been standing on was actually quicksand all along, and they've been sinking so gradually they never noticed until they were in up to their necks. I set my phone down and went back to work, but I kept checking it throughout the day, watching as the reality of their situation slowly dawned on each member of my delightful family. The follow-up messages were even better than the initial panic, as they started to piece together the fact that all of their various financial crises weren't separate, unrelated problems, but rather the systematic dismantling of a support system they'd taken so completely for granted that they'd forgotten it was even there. Patricia was the first to figure it out, bless her Botox-addled heart. "Wait, are you saying you did this on purpose?" she typed, as if the concept of actions having consequences was some kind of revolutionary new philosophy that she'd never encountered before. Jared was next, and his message was a beautiful combination of confusion and indignation. "You can't just cancel my car payment. We had an agreement," which was rich, considering our agreement consisted of me bailing him out of his financial stupidity and him treating me like garbage for the privilege. But Uncle Frank, dear, sweet, freeloading Uncle Frank, delivered the message that made my entire day. "This isn't funny, man. I'll pay you back, I promise." Because apparently, after 6 months of rent-free living and countless jokes at my expense, he'd suddenly discovered both humor and the concept of financial responsibility in the same day. The afternoon brought a whole new wave of messages as word spread through the family network that their personal ATM had apparently gone out of service. Extended relatives I hadn't heard from in months were suddenly very interested in my well-being, asking if everything was okay and whether there was anything they could do to help, which was code for, "Please tell me this doesn't affect the money you occasionally send my way." But my absolute favorite message came from Clara herself, sent from her work phone because apparently she'd figured out that our home phone situation might also be experiencing some technical difficulties. "What did you do?" she typed, and I could practically see the panic in her eyes as she realized that her husband, the family disgrace she'd been treating like a servant, had just demonstrated exactly how much power he'd been quietly wielding all along. I looked at that message for a long time, savoring the moment, before I finally typed back, "Me? I'm just a family disgrace. Nobody listens to me anyway." Then I added a Christmas tree emoji, because why not? 'Tis the season, after all. The best part about watching your carefully orchestrated plan unfold isn't just the satisfaction of seeing justice served. It's the realization that you're finally playing the game by your own rules instead of letting everyone else dictate the terms of your existence. For years, I'd been reactive, always responding to other people's crises, always fixing other people's problems, always being the reliable one while they gotta be the fun ones. But now I was being proactive. Now I was setting the agenda. Now I was the one making the moves while everyone else scrambled to figure out how to respond. And brother, it felt absolutely fantastic. You know what's beautiful about watching someone who thinks they're the puppet master suddenly realize they're actually just another puppet? It's like watching a magician figure out that the rabbit they thought they were pulling out of the hat was actually a live grenade with the pin already pulled. And let me tell you, when Clara showed up at my office that afternoon, she looked like someone who'd just discovered that her magic tricks were about to blow up in her face in the most spectacular way possible. I was sitting at my desk, enjoying what had become my new favorite hobby, Watching my phone continue to buzz with increasingly desperate messages from family members who were slowly coming to terms with the concept that free money doesn't actually exist. When I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking across the warehouse floor with the kind of purpose that usually means someone's about to have a very bad day. Now, Clara showing up at my workplace is about as common as a unicorn riding a bicycle through a snowstorm. In the 15 years I've been working at this place, she's visited exactly 3 times. Once when she needed me to sign some paperwork, once when she wanted to use my employee discount at the company store, and once when she was trying to convince my boss to let me take unpaid time off so she could plan a vacation that I couldn't afford but was apparently going to pay for anyway. So when I looked up and saw her marching through the rows of pallets and industrial equipment like she was on a mission to save the world, I knew that the nuclear fallout from my little financial reorganization had reached critical mass, and the damage control team had officially been deployed. She was wearing her serious business outfit. You know the one, the black pantsuit that she reserves for parent-teacher conferences and job interviews and occasions when she needs to convince someone that she's a responsible adult instead of someone who thinks making cardboard signs to humiliate her husband counts as quality entertainment. Her hair was perfectly styled in that way that takes exactly 45 minutes and 3 different products to achieve, but is supposed to look effortless. And she had that expression on her face that I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that said she was about to deploy her secret weapon of choice, the combination of fake vulnerability and barely controlled anger that she'd perfected over the years. But here's the thing about watching someone try to run the same play they've been using for years. When you finally recognize the pattern, it stops being effective and starts being comedy gold. She spotted me at my desk and made a beeline straight for me, moving with the kind of determination that would have been impressive if it wasn't so predictable. I could see my coworkers starting to take notice, because Clara stomping through a warehouse in heels and a business suit is the kind of spectacle that doesn't happen every day. And guys who spend their shifts moving boxes and operating forklifts don't often get live entertainment delivered directly to their workplace. "We need to talk," she announced when she reached my desk, and her voice had that particular quality that every married man recognizes, the tone that means you're in trouble for something, but you're not going to find out what until you've been thoroughly lectured about your many character flaws and questionable life choices. Now, normally, this would be the part where I would immediately start apologizing for whatever I'd done wrong, even if I wasn't entirely sure what it was, because that's what 15 years of marriage had trained me to do. The path of least resistance, the quickest route to domestic peace, the standard operating procedure for keeping the household running smoothly. But today was different. Today I was operating under a whole new set of rules, and the first rule was that I wasn't going to be anyone's emotional punching bag anymore. "Sure," I said, leaning back in my chair with the kind of casual confidence that I hadn't felt in years. "What's on your mind?" She looked around at my coworkers, who were doing that thing where they pretend to be busy while actually paying attention to every word of what was clearly about to become the most interesting thing that had happened in this warehouse since Tommy from shipping accidentally drove a forklift through the wall last spring. "Privately," she hissed, and I could see that she was already starting to realize that this conversation wasn't going to go the way she'd planned. In her mental script, I was supposed to immediately jump up and follow her outside like a scolded puppy, ready to grovel and apologize and promise to fix whatever mess I'd created. But I wasn't following the script anymore. "Nah, I'm good here," I said, gesturing to my chair like it was a throne, and I was the king of my own little corner of the industrial world. "Besides, I'm on company time, and my boss doesn't like it when we take personal calls during work hours. You understand." The look that crossed her face was absolutely priceless. It was like watching someone try to start a car and suddenly realize that not only was the engine dead, but someone had also stolen the wheels and replaced them with shopping carts. Her carefully planned confrontation was already going off the rails, and we hadn't even gotten to the good part yet. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth, and I could practically see her recalibrating her approach in real time. She glanced around one more time, then leaned in closer and lowered her voice to what I'm sure she thought was a threatening whisper. "What did you do?" And there it was. The same question she'd been asking in increasingly frantic text messages all day, the same demand for answers that she'd been making since the family financial crisis had started unfolding like a beautiful, perfectly choreographed disaster movie. But here's the thing about questions like that. They only have power when the person asking them has some kind of leverage over the person they're asking. And Clara? Clara had just spent the last few days learning exactly how little leverage she actually had. I looked at her for a long moment, taking in the mascara that was slightly smudged around her eyes. Evidence that she'd been crying or at least tearing up with frustration, and the way her hands were shaking just a little bit, probably from a combination of anger and the dawning realization that her world was shifting in ways she couldn't control. Me, I said, with the kind of innocent confusion that would have made an Academy Award winner jealous. I'm just a family disgrace. Nobody listens to me anyway, remember? Her face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds, starting with confusion, moving through recognition, and landing squarely on what I can only describe as barely controlled panic mixed with the kind of rage that comes from realizing you've been outplayed by someone you thought you had completely figured out. Don't, she started, then stopped, then started again. Don't play games with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Jared's car payment, my mother's credit card, Frank's utilities. What did you do? I leaned back in my chair even further, hands behind my head in a pose that I knew would drive her absolutely crazy because it was the exact opposite of the defensive, apologetic posture she was expecting. Oh, that stuff? I just shifted everything into my name only. You know, for security purposes. Safer that way. For someone as untrustworthy as me, right? Watching her process this information was like watching someone try to solve a Rubik's Cube while wearing oven mitts and a blindfold. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out exactly what I'd done and, more importantly, how she was going to undo it. You can't do that, she sputtered. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I heard something in her voice that I'd never heard before: uncertainty. Real, genuine uncertainty about her ability to control the situation. Actually, I can, I said, pulling out my phone and scrolling through the various confirmation emails and account notifications that had been flooding my inbox for the past few days. Turns out when you're the primary account holder, the co-signer, and the person whose name is on all the paperwork, you have a lot more options than people realize. Who knew? She stared at me like I'd just sprouted a second head, and I could see her trying to reconcile this version of her husband, calm, confident, completely in control, with the guy who'd been sitting at the kids' table wearing a family disgrace sign just a few days earlier. The mortgage, she said suddenly, and I could see the exact moment when the full scope of the situation hit her. Tell me you didn't touch the mortgage. I smiled at her, the kind of smile that probably should have come with a warning label, and said, "Relax, Clara. I just shifted everything into my name only. Much more secure that way, don't you think? I mean, you wouldn't want someone as unreliable as the family disgrace to have control over important financial decisions, would you?" The color drained out of her face so fast I thought she might actually faint right there in the middle of my warehouse. She grabbed onto the edge of my desk for support, and I could see her mind racing as she tried to calculate exactly how bad this situation could get. "You're being ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked the conviction it usually carried when she was trying to gaslight me into believing that my reactions to her behavior were unreasonable. "It was just a joke. You know it was just a joke." "Oh, I know," I said, nodding sympathetically. "Just like this is just a joke too. Funny how that works, isn't it?" She stood there for another minute, opening and closing her mouth like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land, trying to find some combination of words that would magically reset the situation back to the way it was before her husband grew a backbone and started playing by his own rules. Finally, she managed to whisper, "What do you want?" And that, right there, was the moment I knew I'd won. Because Clara asking what I wanted instead of telling me what I was going to do was like watching the sun rise in the west, a fundamental shift in the natural order of our relationship that meant everything had changed, and there was no going back to the way things used to be. "Right now," I said, checking my watch like I had somewhere important to be. "I want to finish my work day without any more interruptions. We can talk about this at home, if you want. But Clara," I looked her straight in the eye, "the next time you decide to make me the entertainment at a family dinner, you might want to remember this conversation." She turned and walked away without another word, her heels clicking across the warehouse floor with a lot less confidence than they'd had when she arrived. And as I watched her go, I couldn't help but think that revenge really was a dish best served cold, especially when it came with a side of poetic justice and a generous helping of long overdue reality. You know what's absolutely hilarious? The way people's tone completely changes when they suddenly need something from the person they've been treating like a human punching bag. It's like watching someone flip a personality switch from "you're worthless" to "you're my best friend" faster than you can say "financial crisis." And let me tell you, the entertainment value is off the charts. By evening, my phone had basically become the hotline for family members in various stages of panic, denial, and what I can only describe as the bargaining phase of grief. It was like watching the 5 stages of financial loss play out in real time, except instead of acceptance at the end, everyone seemed to be stuck in a loop between anger and desperation with occasional pit stops at complete delusion. The first call came from Uncle Frank, and I have to give the man credit for his timing. He waited until exactly 5:30, probably figuring that calling during business hours might seem too desperate, but calling after dinner would look like he'd spent the whole day thinking about it. What he didn't realize was that I'd been expecting his call since about 10 this morning, right around the time his electricity would have been scheduled for disconnection. "Hey there, buddy," he started, and right off the bat I could tell this was going to be good because Uncle Frank has never called me buddy in his life. Usually, I'm that guy or Clara's husband or, as of recently, the family disgrace. But apparently when your lights are about to get shut off, everyone becomes your buddy real quick. "Frank," I said, settling back in my recliner with a beer and putting the call on speaker because I wanted to enjoy every single second of this conversation. "What can I do for you?" "Well, you see, there's been some kind of mix-up with the power company," he said, and I could practically hear him sweating through the phone. "They're saying you removed the auto pay on my account, but that can't be right because we never talked about that, and I know you're not the kind of guy who would just do something like that without talking to me first." The beautiful thing about Frank's approach was how he was trying to give me an out, like maybe this was all just a big misunderstanding that we could clear up with a quick phone call, and everything could go back to normal. Like maybe I'd accidentally removed the auto pay while sleepwalking or something equally ridiculous. "Actually, Frank," I said, taking a sip of my beer and savoring the moment, "there's no mix-up. I removed the auto pay because, as it turns out, family disgraces can't be trusted with financial responsibilities. I'm sure you understand." The silence that followed was so long I started to wonder if he'd hung up, but then I heard him clear his throat in that way people do when they're trying to buy time to figure out what the hell they're supposed to say next. "Come on, man," he finally said, and now the desperation was starting to creep into his voice. "Don't do this. I'll pay you back, I promise. I know I've been behind on things, but I'm good for it. You know I'm good for it." "Do I?" I asked, genuinely curious about what fantasy world he was living in where 6 months of rent-free living plus utilities constituted being good for it. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've been living in my property for half a year without paying a single bill, but somehow you managed to afford a motorcycle and season tickets to the football games. So either you're the worst money manager in human history, or you've been playing me for a sucker this whole time." Another long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of casual friendliness. "Look, if this is about the Christmas thing, I'm sorry, okay? Maybe we took it too far. But you can't just leave me without power. It's January, for Christ's sake." "Sorry, Santa's workshop is closed," I replied, borrowing a line I'd been saving up for just this occasion. "Try the kids' table. I hear they're serving nuggets." He hung up without saying goodbye, which honestly hurt my feelings a little because I thought that was a pretty good comeback and deserved at least a courtesy laugh. The next call came about 20 minutes later from Jared, and boy, he was not messing around with pleasantries or pretending this was all a big misunderstanding. He went straight for the throat with all the subtlety of a freight train hitting a brick wall. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, and I had to hold the phone away from my ear because apparently panic makes him forget how to use his inside voice. "The bank is demanding full payment on my truck loan. They're talking about repossession. You can't just do this." "Actually, I can," I said calmly, because the beautiful thing about being legally in the right is that you get to stay calm while everyone else loses their minds. "I'm the cosigner, which means I have certain rights and responsibilities. One of those responsibilities is making sure the loan doesn't default, and since I can't trust a family disgrace like myself to keep making payments, I thought it would be better for everyone if you took over full responsibility. You know I can't afford those payments, he yelled, and there was something almost impressive about how quickly he went from denial to full-blown panic without stopping at any of the intermediate stages. Then maybe you shouldn't have bought a truck you couldn't afford, I replied reasonably. Or maybe you should have thought about that before spending Christmas Eve making jokes about my intelligence while eating food I paid for. This is insane, he sputtered. You're destroying my life over a few jokes. I'm on vacation from being your clown, I said, and then I hung up because honestly, his shouting was starting to give me a headache and I had other calls to enjoy. The third call was from Becca, and she tried a completely different approach. Instead of anger or denial, she went straight for the guilt trip with the kind of emotional manipulation that would make a soap opera writer take notes. You embarrassed us in front of the kids, she said, her voice dripping with wounded indignation. Do you know what it's like to explain to a 7-year-old why mommy's car insurance got canceled? These children look up to you, and you're teaching them that it's okay to hurt people when you're upset. You know what, Becca? I said, settling deeper into my chair because this was going to be good. You're absolutely right. I am teaching the kids something important. I'm teaching them that actions have consequences, and that treating people badly eventually comes back to bite you in the ass. Consider it a valuable life lesson, free of charge. This isn't about consequences, she shot back. This is about you having a temper tantrum because your feelings got hurt. My feelings. I laughed, and it felt good to laugh at something that wasn't my own misery for once. Lady, my feelings checked out of this family about 3 years ago. This isn't about my feelings. This is about basic respect, something you people seem to have forgotten exists. She hung up mid-sentence, probably to go practice her next guilt trip in the mirror. But the call that really made my evening was from Grandma, although I'm pretty sure she didn't actually understand what was happening. Her hearing aid makes every phone conversation sound like she's calling from inside a washing machine during the spin cycle, and her grasp of modern technology is roughly equivalent to a goldfish's understanding of quantum physics. Hello, she shouted into the phone like she was trying to communicate with someone on Mars. Hi, Grandma, I said loudly, because with her you basically have to yell, or she thinks you're whispering on purpose to annoy her. The cable box is broken, she announced. All the channels are gone. Is this because of that internet thing? I couldn't help but smile. Even in the middle of my family's financial apocalypse, Grandma was still convinced that technology was some kind of mysterious force that randomly decided to stop working just to inconvenience her. The cable's not broken, Grandma, I explained. The service got disconnected. Disconnected from what? She asked, and I realized this conversation was going to require more patience than I had available. Never mind, Grandma, I said. I'm sure someone will figure it out. Well, I hope so, she said. Wheel of Fortune comes on in an hour. And that, right there, perfectly summed up my entire family's relationship with reality. Even when their world is falling apart, they're still mainly concerned about their entertainment. You know what they say about social media being the great equalizer? Well, turns out it's also the great amplifier for stupid decisions. And my dear wife Clara was about to provide a masterclass in how to turn a private family drama into a public relations disaster that would make a politician's scandal look like a minor traffic violation. I was enjoying my morning coffee and scrolling through my phone, reading the latest batch of increasingly desperate messages in our family group chat, when I noticed that little notification on Facebook. You know the one, that innocent little red circle that usually means someone's posted another picture of their breakfast or shared another video of a cat doing something supposedly adorable, but actually just normal cat behavior. But this notification was different. This was Clara's latest post, and judging by the fact that it had already accumulated 17 comments and 12 reactions in the span of about 20 minutes, it was apparently the kind of content that makes people stop scrolling and start typing the digital equivalent of grabbing popcorn. The post itself was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive martyrdom that would have made a Victorian-era novelist weep with envy. Clara had crafted what could only be described as a digital sob story that hit all the classic beats. The innocent victim, the cruel oppressor, the mysterious suffering that she was bravely enduring for the sake of others, and just enough vague details to make people curious, but not enough to actually explain what was really happening. Sometimes you think you know someone, she'd written, because apparently she'd decided to start with the classic opening move of making this about betrayal rather than consequences. Living with cruelty is something no one should have to endure, especially during what should be the most magical time of year. Christmas was ruined by someone's pettiness, and now innocent family members are suffering because one person decided that their hurt feelings matter more than everyone else's well-being. I had to read it 3 times because the sheer audacity of her rewriting history was so spectacular that I couldn't quite believe someone had actually posted it with a straight face. This was the same woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation just a few days earlier, the same person who had made me wear a sign calling me a family disgrace while everyone laughed at my expense, and now she was positioning herself as the victim of someone else's cruelty. But the real kicker was the way she'd phrased everything to make it sound like I'd randomly decided to hurt people for no reason, like I'd woken up one morning and thought, you know what would be fun? Destroying everyone's financial stability because I'm feeling petty. No mention of the kids' table, no reference to the humiliation dinner, no acknowledgement of years of being treated like the family ATM while simultaneously being treated like the family joke. The comments section was already filling up with exactly the kind of responses Clara had been fishing for. Her bestie Denise, who has the intellectual depth of a puddle and the emotional intelligence of a particularly vindictive houseplant, had jumped in with her usual brand of supportive ignorance. "Stay strong, Queen," she'd typed, complete with a series of heart emojis and prayer hands. Because apparently Denise thought Clara was dealing with some kind of natural disaster rather than the entirely predictable consequences of treating your spouse like garbage for years on end. Other friends and acquaintances were chiming in with their own versions of supportive outrage, all of them operating under the assumption that Clara was some kind of innocent victim rather than the architect of her own destruction. "You deserve so much better, and some people never grow up," and my personal favorite, "Real men don't take their anger out on their families." Reading through the comments was like watching a group of people try to solve a puzzle when they were missing about 90% of the pieces, but they were all so confident in their conclusions that nobody bothered to ask for more information. They were all ready to grab their digital pitchforks and defend poor Clara from the mysterious monster who had apparently decided to ruin Christmas for fun. But here's the thing about social media. It's a two-way street. And if you're going to put your business out there for everyone to see, you'd better be prepared for everyone to actually see it, including the person you're trying to make look like the villain in your carefully crafted narrative. I stared at that post for a long time, thinking about how to respond. I could have taken the high road, ignored it completely, let Clara have her moment of public sympathy while I quietly went about my business. I could have been the bigger person, turned the other cheek, all those noble things that people are always telling you to do when someone's publicly attacking your character. But you know what? I was tired of being the bigger person. I was tired of turning the other cheek. I was tired of letting other people control the narrative while I sat quietly in the corner like the family disgrace I'd been labeled as. So I crafted my response with the same care and attention to detail that Clara had put into her original post, except mine had the added advantage of being true. Says the queen who made me wear a sign that said "family disgrace" at Christmas dinner in front of our children. I typed, my fingers moving across the keyboard with the kind of satisfaction that comes from finally getting to tell your side of the story. Relegated me to the kids' table while her entire family spent the evening making jokes at my expense. But sure, let's talk about cruelty and hurt feelings. "Merry Christmas, Your Highness." I hit post, and then sat back to watch the fireworks, because I knew that Clara's carefully constructed victim narrative was about to crumble faster than a cookie left out in the rain. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Within minutes, the comments section had gone from a supportive echo chamber to something that looked like a digital crime scene. People who had been offering Clara sympathy and outrage just minutes before were suddenly asking questions, demanding details, trying to figure out what the hell was actually going on. "Wait, you made him wear a sign," typed someone named Jennifer who I vaguely remembered from Clara's high school reunion. "Like, an actual sign that said he was a disgrace?" "At Christmas dinner, with the kids watching," added another commenter, and I could practically see the horror dawning on people as they started to piece together what had actually happened. My phone started buzzing almost immediately with private messages from people who had seen the exchange, some of them asking for more details, others offering support, and a few who apparently felt the need to share their own stories about family members who had treated them poorly. It was like my response had opened some kind of floodgate of people who had been in similar situations but had never seen someone actually stand up for themselves. But the best part was watching Clara's damage control efforts in real time. She started replying to comments, trying to minimize what had happened, explaining that it was just a joke and that I was overreacting and that people were misunderstanding the situation. But the more she tried to explain, the worse it got, because every explanation just made her sound more and more like someone trying to justify the unjustifiable. It was supposed to be funny. She wrote in response to someone asking how making your husband wear a humiliation sign was acceptable behavior. He was supposed to laugh about it. Everyone else thought it was hilarious. Everyone else except the person you were humiliating, came the reply, and I had to admire the commenter's ability to cut straight to the heart of the matter with surgical precision. The post started getting shared, because apparently my family's dysfunction was entertaining enough to warrant spreading to other people's networks. Friends of friends were weighing in, strangers were offering their opinions, and what had started as Clara's attempt to gain sympathy for her situation had turned into a public referendum on her behavior. My coworker Liam sent me a screenshot of the post with a message that just said, "Holy shit, dude," in all caps, followed by about 17 laughing emojis. Apparently word had spread to my workplace, and people were talking about the Christmas dinner disaster like it was the latest episode of their favorite reality TV show. But the real moment of poetic justice came when someone, I never did figure out who, shared a screenshot of the exchange to one of those public shaming groups where people post about bad behavior they've witnessed. Within hours, my family's Christmas Eve debacle was being discussed by thousands of strangers, most of whom seemed to agree that Clara had gotten exactly what she deserved. The comments on that shared post were brutal in the best possible way. People were calling Clara everything from entitled to emotionally abusive, and sharing their own stories about family members who thought humiliation was a form of entertainment. My favorite comment came from someone who wrote, "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes." This guy just gave his family the reality check they deserved. By the end of the day, Clara had deleted her original post, but it was too late. Screenshots live forever on the internet, and enough people had seen the exchange that the damage was done. Her attempt to paint herself as the victim had backfired so spectacularly that she'd actually managed to make me look like the hero of the story, which was honestly more than I could have hoped for. That evening, she came home looking like she'd been through a blender made of embarrassment and regret. Her phone had been buzzing all day with messages from people who had seen the post, and apparently not all of them were supportive. Word had even reached her workplace, where her boss had apparently seen the whole thing and made some comments about family drama that suggested Clara's professional reputation might have taken a hit along with her social media credibility. "Are you happy now?" she asked as she walked through the door, her voice carrying the kind of defeated tone that people get when they finally realize they've been outplayed. "Actually," I said, looking up from my dinner, "yeah, I kind of am." And for the first time in years, that was absolutely true. You know what's beautiful about small towns? Word travels faster than a wildfire during drought season, and once a story gets legs, it sprints through the community like it's training for the Olympics. What's even more beautiful is when that story happens to be about a group of people getting their comeuppance in such spectacular fashion that it becomes the kind of legend people tell their grandchildren about. I first realized that my little family drama had achieved local celebrity status when I walked into Murphy's Diner for my usual Tuesday morning coffee, and the entire place went quiet for about 3 seconds before erupting into what can only be described as enthusiastic approval. It was like walking into a sports bar right after your team scored the winning touchdown, except instead of cheering for a football pea. Olami Iomi. I always felt dizzy after dinner. Last night, I hid the food my wife cooked and faked being unconscious. When she made a call thinking I was out, the words I heard made me break inside. Chapter 1. The Fake Faint. My name's Marcus Hale. For 3 months I've been feeling like a drunk sailor every night after dinner. My wife, Claudia, always served me special meals, fancy salmon, artisanal pasta, soups that looked like art exhibitions. Everyone thought she was a dream wife. Last night, I decided to stop being the polite, dizzy husband. While Claudia hummed like an angel in the kitchen, I slipped the food into a napkin like a 5-year-old hiding peas from his mom. Then I threw myself on the floor like an Oscar contender. Crash. Plate shatters. I'm out cold. Inside I'm thinking, Move over Leonardo DiCaprio. There's a new fake fainting king in town. Chapter 2, 3 months of romance. Rewind. 3 months ago, life looked perfect. Promotion at work, raise, new project, and a wife who suddenly wanted to cook gourmet dinners every night. My friends were jealous. Dude, she's feeding you Michelin meals. Yeah, and apparently microdosing me with something that made my brain feel like a dial-up modem. The dizziness always came 30 to 40 minutes after dinner. I blamed stress. Claudia blamed my man diet. I should have blamed the salmon. Chapter 3, The Perfect Wife Act. Claudia played the part perfectly. She drove me to work when I felt wobbly. She texted during the day like a helicopter parent. Are you okay? Did you eat? Are you dizzy? My assistant, Priya, noticed. Marcus, you're forgetting things, she whispered after I blanked in a meeting. You're acting like my uncle on Ambien. Claudia echoed the same concern at home. You should rest. Let someone else handle the big project. She sounded supportive. She was actually trying to swipe it. Chapter 4, Doctor with Eyebrows of Doom. Finally, I saw Dr. Howard Lee, my longtime physician. The man has eyebrows so expressive they deserve their own Instagram. He leaned forward. When do the symptoms occur? After dinner, I muttered, rubbing my temples. He squinted like Sherlock. Keep a food diary. Everything you eat. Everything you feel. I left his office feeling like I'd just been assigned homework by my disappointed dad. But I did it. And the diary didn't lie. Chapter 5, The Pattern is Real. My homework revealed the ugly truth. Only Claudia's dinners made me dizzy. The 3 nights I ate at work, I felt sharper than a knife. I started sneaking food into napkins, flushing sauces down the toilet, and feeding the neighbor's cat gourmet leftovers. The cat looked like a sumo wrestler by week's end. Claudia started noticing. You're losing weight, Marcus. Yeah, because I stopped eating poison a la mode, I thought. Chapter 6, The Ultimate Test. I needed proof. Saturday night, I ate every bite. 35 minutes later, my brain was melting. But my phone was secretly recording everything. Through the fog, I heard Claudia's heels click into my home office. My laptop booted up. My presentation, my baby, was on that machine. And then I heard it. Her voice, low and cold. He's out. I can grab the files now. Transfer better be ready tonight. I may have been drugged, but even I knew that was not a recipe swap with her book club. Chapter 7, Setting the Trap. Monday night was game time. Less than 48 hours before my big pitch to Sterling Global, I staged my collapse. Napkin food dump. Dramatic faint. I could have charged tickets. Claudia called her mystery partner. He's out cold again. Their biggest campaign will be ours. My inner sarcasm screamed, Gee, honey, love you too. While she raided my files, I texted Dr. Lee and Detective Carla Morris, a corporate crimes specialist my buddy had recommended. Corporate theft in progress. Poisoning. Send help. Chapter 8, Sirens and Hide and Seek. Sirens wailed outside. I've never been so happy to hear off-key police sirens. But Claudia heard them too. Her concerned wife, mask slipped. Marcus, she called, voice sharp. I hid behind the kitchen island like a terrified ninja. Through the crack under the cabinets, I saw her expensive heels clicking on the tiles, stepping over the broken plate. She darted back to the office to destroy evidence. Bad timing. Officers burst in. Detective Morris stormed past me like an action hero. They caught Claudia with my laptop, the USB drive, and a cute little vial of husband-make-sleepy juice. Chapter 9, The Price Tag of Betrayal. Hours later, my kitchen was a crime scene with coffee cups. Detective Morris slid a bag across the table, Claudia's phone, the vial, the USB drive. She was getting $6,000 a month plus a $40,000 bonus from Apex Marketing if she delivered your project before your presentation. I stared at the vial. That tiny bottle had hijacked my brain for months. My wife's loyalty, $46,000. My sarcastic inner voice said, Wow, Marcus, you're practically on the clearance rack. Dr. Lee patted my shoulder. You're lucky you figured it out when you did. Long term, this stuff can wreck your organs. Good to know, I deadpanned. Next time I'll ask for the low-sodium version. Chapter 10, The Comeback. I had less than 12 hours until the Sterling Global pitch. Everyone told me to postpone. But I'm Marcus Hale. I don't just survive poisoning. I make PowerPoints after it. I stayed up all night refining my presentation. The next morning, in the boardroom, I nailed it. Sterling CEO shook my hand. This is brilliant. When can we start? 3 months later, the campaign smashed every target. I was promoted to vice president. Claudia was in prison. Apex Marketing lost its clients. Now I do speaking gigs on corporate security and domestic betrayal. My opening line: if your spouse suddenly starts cooking gourmet meals after you get a promotion, maybe order takeout. The room always laughs. Standing in my new corner office, I looked out at the skyline. No dizziness, no poison, just me, my work, and a story that turned betrayal into the punchline of my own comeback.